Welcome to this UNET Plus debate on fighting terrorism in Europe. Our programme today is presented within the Citizens Corner concept. The debate is produced and hosted by UNET Plus and Sky Radio Estonia, a member of the UNET Plus network. The debate can be followed live in European Parliament on the UNET Plus Inside website, on our Facebook profile, as well as on Twitter using the hashtag Citizens Corner. I'm Brian Maguire. Joining us today to discuss fighting terrorism across Europe, from security to citizens' rights, Josef WEIDENHOLZER, MEP from Austria. Welcome, sir, from the Socialist Group in the European Parliament. Birgit Siepel, a German MEP, also Social Democrat. Claudian Frunzulică, a Romanian Social Democrat MEP. And George Ventu Silva, Deputy Head of Unit D2 Terrorism and Radicalisation at the European Commission. And by telephone from Paris, we have Nadim Ori, Human Rights Watch Director of Terrorism and Counter-Terrorism Programme. And also joining us are two students from our campus radio, Warsaw, Poland, and UBB Radio, Babeș-Bolyai University in Romania. Welcome to all of you. Let's get to the heart of the matter, the balance between rights and the prevention of terrorism. Birgit Siepel, do we have this balance right at the moment, and do you have confidence that we're going the right direction?
Now, do we have the balance at the time being? Maybe, but we have to be very careful to keep that balance. We are starting to create more and more databases. Some of them may be collecting the same data, so we have cross-cutting elements, and we have to be careful not to create a situation with the best intention ever that we do survey every single step of our citizens, and at the end we are going too far, and maybe then we will water down a little bit freedom and also privacy. And this is something we have to check very, very carefully, and I think it's worth to have long debates on that, so to meet the correct criteria.
Okay, Claudian Frunzulică, do you think that the average citizen in Europe understands how much data is held on them, and that they can be confident that their government will use that data correctly?
Probably not, but we are doing everything possible in order that this balance will always exist. At the same time, we have to look at the last terrorist attacks in Europe that occurred in the last years. You know, the number of failed or foiled terrorist attacks increased tremendously. Then, you know, one of our main tasks as parliamentarians, European parliamentarians, all together with the European institutions, is to safeguard the stability in Europe and the security of our citizens and the normal life of our citizens. These are important goals that have to prevail at the end. And it's so important that, you know, we do anything possible in order that we increase the trust among the European citizens, to increase the trust between the European citizens and their governments, between the member states of the European Union, as well towards the European Union institutions and structures. This is the only way in which we can prevail at the end. And of course, it's very important to increase this fight against terrorism, like the new, let's say, European counter-terrorism structure center with Europol in Hague that was established starting with 1st January of this year. On my opinion, it's only a small step forward, because with only 45, 50 people to better integrate intelligence and to provide support for the member states on anti-terrorism, this is not enough. I was proposing in many occasions within the European Parliament, within the Security and Defense Subcommittee, that the European Union should have its own independent counter-terrorism agency with its own intelligence service and with structures, troops that the member states could pull, you know, for the anti-terrorism.
Okay, Josef WEIDENHOLZER, do you think that there is appetite amongst the member states and amongst citizens for such a cohesive and broad grouping of intelligence resources?
I don't know whether appetite is the right word. Yeah, so I think there is a need of coordination, certainly, because we have many information which is just not shared, yeah, which is available, which is there, but it is a kind of property. You do not really want to give it to the other, so you want to have something in exchange. I think that's one of the problems. So I would rather prefer that we have more cooperation, and there are some progress made. I think Europol is a good example for cooperation, and there's a need for more sharing. Of course, there's also a question what else can you do, but sometimes I have the feeling that the second step is made as the first step. So the first step should be to actually to make the optimal use of the means we already have.
Josef Silva, are European member states using the resources they already have, and are we going too fast with our counterterrorism measures?
No, I wouldn't say that. Going back to also what the three previous speakers have said, the European Union developed a paradigm on the fight against terrorism over the last 15 years. It was totally different to the previous paradigms, which were based on war on terror, protection of borders, on the exclusive role of the state. Our paradigm is based on the opposite, on the rule of law, on the fact that borders will not protect us from the problems that come from within, and it's based on the notion that everyone in our society has a role to play in the fight against terrorism, and therefore we need to draw on frontliners, civil society, and so on. Over the last 15 years, we have been going in a direction which is basically more for more. We want more democracy, more fundamental rights, more data protection constraints, and more security. We need to get the intelligence together, we need to gather our resources, we need to co-opt the will of the member states together with the added value European institutions have when they have it, and it is not in all circumstances that we have that added value to bring to our member states. Are we achieving this? Going back to the question you asked, Ms. Zippel, in the beginning, is the balance right? Well, the balance must be much better than it was a few years ago when the European Parliament didn't have the role that it has, when the Commission could not take a member state to court for infringement of decisions they have taken themselves. So we have been making a huge progress in the direction that certainly we all want to take. The Commission itself is much more aware even and focused on bringing all the elements to bear when we are putting together new ideas. Involvement of the Fundamental Rights Agency, involvement of the EDPS from the earliest stages of conception of an idea, not just checking it against the ideal parameters of the Charter on Fundamental Rights, but actually getting the actors involved and listening, doing public consultations before we actually come up with the ideas and we tune them down. Then is the willingness of the member states being capitalized to the maximum where it exists, or is it being overestimated in other circumstances?
Do you need to benchmark it then?
We need to benchmark it, but that is it depends very much on which area of counterterrorism we are focusing on.
Because people, there's a lot of tension in the House here between the centre-right and the centre-left on PNR and how the data was going to be used, how it was going to be gathered. Have those tensions gone away? Does every terrorist attack bring everybody closer together, or do they push ideologies further apart in terms of the use of the data?
First of all, I'm not sure if this is only a question of ideology. I think we have to be very open that after some attacks, there is always the wish for politicians to send a signal to citizens that we can act. And the easiest thing to send that signal is we create a law. So, to be very careful. I don't believe that that's always the best idea, because where will we end up if after any attack we will create a new law, new data collecting? So we should be very careful. And what we missed in the last years is to find out, are we really taking all the data with the measures that are already on board. We have the SIS system, the VIS system, we have many databases, so we have to check on that. Now that PNR is decided, we have to work with it, but I think we have to be very careful. I would like to come back to one proposal one of our colleagues just mentioned about an own European intelligence. And I know that coming from that English words, there is always some misunderstanding going back to German because it's not clear, is it intelligence in the sense of secret service or is it intelligence more in the sense of police work and exchanging information? But whatever it is, if it's secret service, we should check what can we do, because already on national level the control of secret services is not always the very best, to say it in a diplomatic way. When it comes to common police works, this might be a second or third step as an aim. But what are the competences of that European police forces? What rights do they have acting on their own basis? And on the other hand, what about the suspected or accused persons? What are their rights? Where are they going to court? What are the rules? So yes, it's an aim we have to think about. But we have to be careful on the steps, so not to lose control about, I think our colleague from Commission mentioned it, not to lose contact to the rule of law and fundamental rights, but to do the steps very careful.
Okay, let's ask our students. You have a question, Sorina?
How relevant would it be to approach the subject of terrorism in schools, in education?
Claudian.
I think it's a very important question, and our young people should have to be trained, in my opinion, through education, how to face such challenges, such threats on our security and stability in Europe. In my opinion, why not? This should have to be introduced in the curricula of the schools, you know, to present somehow a history of terrorism, because listen, terrorism, there are 5 kinds of terrorism. You know, is different. Europe and the world faced terrorism from a long time ago, especially in Europe after the Second World War. You know, it's a jihadist terrorism. There is also this kind of left-wing and anarchist terrorism. It's the right-wing extremism terrorism, and there is the ethno terrorism as well, and separatist one, and the ethno and separatist, and the last one, you know, one case terrorism. It happened that a crazy man or a nut guy is doing an act of terrorism. Then it's very important to present to the children, you know, what does it mean, the terrorism, how terrorism is influencing our lives.
Let me ask Jorge Bento Silva.
How to fight terrorism, of course.
Yeah, extremely relevant. Yes, yes, yes. First, we believe, we, the Commission, currently, Commissioner Sir Julian King, particularly concerned with this, we think that at this point in time, the radicalization of young people, very young people, on the one hand, and the issue of minors, including infants that we will have in Europe coming from Syria. 350 kids, 400 kids were born in Syria. They have been watching the most despicable extremes of horror. They have been conditioned to terrorism. And we simply do not know yet. We are working on that with Radicalization Awareness Network, with frontline professionals. So first of all, a very clear focus is being given and is going to be given over the next year, 2017, the Maltese presidency, Estonian presidency, on the issue of children, young adolescents, and terrorism and radicalization. Secondly, schools have a huge role to play. In last year, in the European Day of Victims of Terrorism, the 11th of March, we have welcomed in Brussels to the official celebrations that were done with European Parliament involvement, member states and so on, 2 classes of high school children, together with the parents of kids killed in the attacks in Paris. And we brought them together because we think that the testimony of victims, on the one hand, and the preventive work and the citizenship work that young people, that adolescents, that school people can do, not only in understanding terrorism, not only in putting a barrier to it in radicalization, but building the citizenship of the next generation, is fundamental.
Okay, Josef WEIDENHOLZER.
Yeah. So I believe, of course, it's important to teach it in schools, but this will not solve the problem. So I really think it's very important to have this de-radicalization social workers. This is the most effective tool as I see it. I know it from my country in Vienna, where we had a lot of people going to jihad and where we could really cut this influx of terrorists. So this was a big success, and I believe on this level, preventing going into the milieus and talking to people, taking up information, deconstruct their narratives. Yeah? This is the most important thing. This is, I think, very important. And a third component is also the question of you have to go for the root causes. I mean, if you have people in desperate situations, it's very, very likely that those people who did not have school for 2, 3, 4 years, yeah, that there's something going on in their head. So you have to really, the most effective way is to start at this very early stage and to work there. Yeah?
Okay.
And we don't deliver on this really for the moment.
Big people.
I think we have to be very careful what kind of awareness raising we are willing to do in schools, because we do have some lessons on how to tackle with terrorism. I think this also could lead to a situation where we are fueling fears and concerns. And on the other hand, at the same time, yes, any single attack is terrible because many people at one point could become victim. On the other hand, in the everyday life of citizens, a robbery in the household, or we just had a debate on violence against women, is much more important and affecting their lives more often than the terrorist attacks. But what we have to talk about, and you mentioned different forms of terrorism, is what is happening in our societies. Even nowadays with the terrorist forms, we find out that it's European citizens grown up in our cities that one day or the other started to radicalize, starting to kill people, already ready to do some self-suicide attacks. So something must be wrong in our societies, and I think it's important to talk about that, and at the same time very general, try to find out and talk with young people who are using all the new so-called new media, social media. How can we use it, and how can I find out what is only real free speech and where is hate speech starting? What are the expressions that do lead to dehumanization of people? And I think this is something where we have to focus and do more to prepare young people to handle with all those messages.
I think this is really important. I grew up in Belfast at a time when radicalization of a different kind was one of at least two of the types you just mentioned. They existed, and the education system was separate. You Catholics went to one school, Protestants went to another, but it was the home instruction that mattered most. So if you grew up in a home, regardless of which side of the society you were on, if you grew up in a home which had the understanding that violence was acceptable or that violence was necessary, you carried that with you. And then whenever you saw this on television or in the playground, we swapped bullet casings in the playground at 7 years old. This was fairly normal, but what you had at home mattered. But today, the home message can't be controlled anymore because we have the social media at its minimum is uncontrollable by parents, and the radicalization is a different level. So how do we counter that narrative? How does the European Commission propose that this kind of intrusive behavior by government into the individual lives of citizens can be regulated?
Well, we don't take it from the point of view of the intrusive role of governments into people's lives. What we are doing is exactly the opposite. On the one hand, clearly there is role to be done in making sure that the means of communication that are available to our young people and older people are not abused by criminal people with criminal messages. What is criminal in a bookshop is criminal in the internet, and we must fight it. This we are doing with great determination, and in a way that is also agile. We are reaching out to the internet industry to try and get them, and the response is so far very positive. The Internet Forum is going to meet in the coming days to try and get them aware of their responsibility and of the fact that if they don't freely take their responsibility, they will have to face legislation most probably. So there is movement that is taking place in order to regulate the net space, not from a state policing vantage point, but from the point of view first and foremost of the internet providers, making sure that the rules of contract with their customers are respected and people are not putting decapitations in their space. At the other end, and that is crucial, we are not here trying to predicate the right solution. The right solution is known by the right people, which are the people that live in the real world. In Mechelen, here in Belgium, we have a town of 100,000 people with all the conditions for 50, 60 persons to have left from there to go to Syria. Not one has gone to Syria. And they are subject to the same internet, to the same communications world. What made the crucial difference is what is happening in this city, the relationship that the citizens have with each other, the relationship they have with local authorities, the relationship kids of different extractions, the kids in the Protestant and the Catholic school have with each other, having single places to assemble, to communicate. And this is not the Commission telling these people, it's the frontliners in the Radicalisation Awareness Network finding positive solutions of people that actually know how to tackle the problem, and when there is someone elsewhere in a difficult situation not knowing how to tackle, putting the two in contact, putting the extra money and bringing the expertise, the little expertise that might be necessary to help to solve the problems.
That rings true. Let's go to Robert. Robert, you have a question for the panel?
So when we fight against terrorism, should we respect values such as human rights, or should we be ruthless when dealing with them?
Let's put this in the context of presidential candidates, shall we? How do we convey to the population at large and a new generation that has never really had to deal with the law as it gets older, that there are limits to what is acceptable, and that when you hear people like President-elect Trump saying it doesn't matter, we'll do what we want, it's the government in charge, and that's human rights are a sacrifice worth making for the sake of our security. Anybody buy that agenda? Birgit?
I think the answer is very short. Of course, we have to respect human rights. What we do see currently with this international terrorism, one of the aims is to destroy our way of life, to destroy freedom, to destroy democracy. And if we do not respect our own rules, our own values, then this will mean the terrorists won the game. And that's why we have to respect fundamental rights. And we are back to the very first question of this debate. We have to ensure that we find the right balance to protect our values, but at the same time give our police forces the correct measures so that they can fight crime and terrorism.
Dora Claudia.
You know, the terrorism is putting a threat on three important values. First of all, it's our security, the security of the European citizens. Secondly, it's putting a threat on the values of our democratic societies. And third, on the rights and freedoms of the European citizens. Then, of course, all over the time, we have to respect the law, because it has to exist, this balance between, fight against terrorism with all our capabilities, and on the other side, respect of human rights and respect of the citizen rights and of the, let's say, fundamental democratic values. It's so important for Europe. These are the European Union values that we have to protect and promote.
Josef WEIDENHOLZER.
Yes, I think you need human rights. You cannot. There's always a balance, and human rights is actually the prior aim of every society. If you cannot guarantee human rights, so this can only be exceptional in some cases where you have to to break this. So I don't think countries like France, which have now for a year a state of emergency, that this is a good situation. So this is always something for an exception, yeah. And if it becomes normality, this is not what we want to have in Europe.
Personally, I take the view that you can have my data so long as it's used properly and there's a due legal process. And I think one time, Big People, we spoke a little bit about this, is that if you have the correct legal processes, if there's a right of appeal, if I trust the judicial system, then we're not so concerned about what the government has in terms of our data. Do you still agree with that?
No, first of all, the question is, do we have clear procedures? Second point is to create again and again new databases is also a question of costs. It's very costly. So at the end, those who are in favor of those databases have to tell the citizens, was it effective? So, and at the end, if you create a database to fight terrorism and it's not working, so you might start, oh, then we have to use it for other purposes. So it's not the very first step,
Mission
but
creep.
can be a second, a third step to increase the use of the data, and then maybe we will end up with using the data in a wrong way. The second question is that it's necessary not only to talk about data protection, so to talk about how long are the data needed, who has the right to have access to the data, for what are we using them, but there is also the question of data security. Only this week, yesterday, we heard in Germany, many people couldn't phone because the system was hacked. We have not only very big companies whose data are hacked, we have small hospitals whose data are stolen, data of private persons, of patients, very sensitive health data. So we have to be very careful how many data we should collect, where they are stored, and how we make sure that only some people have access for some purposes, and that also the question of data security is something everybody is aware about.
I was moderating a panel this morning on cybersecurity, and we had some experts from San Francisco there. One of them was saying that cyber hacking, cyber crime, is worth $450 billion a year. That sits between Google as the largest company and Microsoft as the third largest company. It's really big business. How do we reconcile an era of counterterrorism with a hacking business and a cybercrime business which is there to destroy the confidence in the system itself? Josef?
Yeah, I still think it is important that you have security, and security also means that your data are used in a legal, proper way, so that.
But what if I steal your data? How's it going to be used in a legal, proper way?
No, I don't want this. So you need a framework where this is not possible. I think the European framework in the data protection package is quite a good example that this is possible. I mean, so. All the others, just kind of post-privacy, that everybody can use everything. This is just not.
Some of the experts this morning were saying that the biggest security risk is between the chair and the keyboard. That's the weakest link, is the person actually using it. The hacker is something else. Yeah. So we expose ourselves. Do we need
your fridge? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
the Internet of everything.
Smart metering and this kind of. Yeah. These are the access points for cybercrime. Yeah?
Do you agree with that, George?
Yes, I agree with both sides. The issue is gigantic. We now have an extremely active global business on hacking. Allegedly, there are companies out there that no longer have the capital to buy their own 0 days, i.e. breaches into their own software that criminals possess and that which they are auctioning in the global market. And the one that has the breach doesn't have the funds to buy the knowledge into the existence of the breach, let alone how to repair it. So this is a huge problem. How can we tackle this problem? Well, we can address the problem between the keyboard and so there is a huge effort to be made in terms of net hygiene. in the companies, private citizens, there is a lot of behavior, good practices that need to be there. We need to have the capacity as organizations, as states, as the European Union, inserts in the expert centers on cybersecurity to understand what is happening, to identify what is happening, to take measures. We need to have a global system where when attacks are not coming from individual crooks but from more structured sources, one can as well have a process of deterrence and measured response which are analogous to what is happening in other domains. Certainly the European Union must get its a part of the act together, and we are not claiming that we have done that. In the European Agenda on Security, cybersecurity is one of the 3 priorities. In the European Union, in the Security Union, cyber figures extremely high. In my Director General, a new unit on cyber has been created 2 months ago, and the capacity we have on cyber is being doubled as we speak.
Have you been hacked yet?
Sure.
Allegedly yesterday.
Excellent. That's just the confidence building measure we need. Let me put this proposal to you. So say I'm sitting somewhere inside Russia, and I kind of like the idea of taking down the electricity system in France. And to do that, it knocks out the water supply as well. And within 2 weeks, I know that the French people are going to be rebelling against the government. There will be no law and order at that point. How do you justify having encrypted systems like WhatsApp? How do you justify having encrypted systems like Telegram, for example, which the security services can't access, but which could perhaps have been used to at least identify an attack, if not stop it? Birgit Siepel, solve that problem.
No, I think so far I'm very happy to say that I get more and more acknowledgement from Commission, from some member states and here in Parliament, that encryption is a very important thing. Because only with encryption you can ensure that your communication for banks, for private persons, for enterprises may not be hacked, and those data will not be taken. So encryption is a very important issue. We have to work with that. On the other hand, yes, we need to find out what is happening with terrorists, but I'm sorry to say the fact that terrorists are using one or the other measure doesn't mean we have to avoid it. It's not that I'm not allowed to buy very simple, silly example. It's not that if terrorists would start to use knives for their attacks, that I'm no longer allowed to buy a knife for my kitchen, even though you can, of course, kill a person with that. So we have to find solutions how to deal with it, how to do preparatory actions to find out who the terrorists are. And it's not only that they are using internet, they are also using different ways, so we have to find solutions for that. But in general, encryption is a very important thing.
Dirk Claudia, I want to just ask you one question, and you answered this as well. Is that the sense of proportion here, like you say, the knife, anybody's got it, so like anybody can use it. Are we more at risk of the fear of terrorism and our response to it, and how we destroy human rights and actually the terrorism itself?
In fact, we need a high level of cooperation between the states' institutions, security and defense institutions, and all these companies like Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, and so on and so forth. There is no other way, because this is the only way we can, for example, stop and even close some sites used by the terrorist organizations. They used very much all these platforms, to hire new terrorists, joining them, for example, in Syria and in Iraq. They used all these platforms, to promote, their radical, jihadist messages and so on and so forth. It's so important that all these, secret institutions will better cooperate in the future to confront the terrorism and to better pooling and sharing. Because, at this moment, how many European Union countries are exchanging informations, usually intelligence? About 5. 6 maybe, on a day basis. 5, 6 countries among the 20, still 28. Is it possible to continue this way?
So the Incense team, which is based across in Schumann as well, they have very limited resources. They can't even afford the software that they want to make this integration work. Is this time that Europe simply spend more money to make it work, or is this cost analysis, which Birgit mentioned earlier, just going to get in the way of everything? We have to demonstrate results, or there's nothing happens.
There is no perfect security. Everyone knows that. There is no perfect cyber security. Anytime there will be a hacker that will develop a system, to hack your informations. This is a war. This is out there. It's a war. This war goes on each and every day. But we have to spend as much as possible in order to make Europe safer. This is our message, because we have to make Europe safer. An Europe for freedom, security and justice for our citizens. In this way, they are going to continue to believe in the European Union.
I would like to come back to the point that we need to delete hate speech, all the pages where terrorists are doing and promoting their actions. But this is a Sisyphus work, we say in Germany. So you delete the one page and then there will be another one. It can be copied and be put back to the internet every time. So yes, we have to try to do so. But I think what in the long run is more important, that we strengthen our democratic forces. So coming back to the idea to bring some ideas to school, we have to strengthen our democracy. We have to talk to citizens, to young people, so that they get aware this is hate crime, this is a bad message, I'm not following it, maybe even to counterbalance. I think this is the more important thing. You have to delete the worst cases, of course, but to counterbalance, to raise awareness, to strengthen democratic forces, I think this is the answer we have to give.
What if the President of the United States is the one putting this out there? How do you instruct young people on that? How do you deal with hate speech which is coming out of the cabinet and from members of another government? Do we have to have a level playing field and say that's not acceptable, we don't accept your message here, even if they're an ally? Because we already have examples of that. This isn't something hypothetical anymore.
I think wherever you meet hate crime and you see it, you have to speak out loud that this is unacceptable, whatever it is. And even if it's a very good partner, not talking about Erdogan, maybe talking about Trump or some other friends, even within European Union, especially amongst friends, it must be possible to say, stop, this is going too far, this is kind of hate speech, so stop it.
Yes, well, perhaps first a comment on this leitmotif of the fact that member states do not cooperate in the intelligence field. I'm afraid that this is an insufficient way of describing the situation. There are three types of intelligence, basically, that one is talking about when you're talking about terrorism.
Low, high, and average.
No, we are talking about strategic intelligence, the one instant processes. On that, Europe has got its act together. The military side in EAS, INSEN, member state security services, they are able to process and to analyze and supply the intelligence required by bureaucrats in the Commission to produce proposals that are proportionate and justified, and this is working on a daily basis and has been for years now. When you're talking about operational intelligence, that is a different kettle of fish. And there you have two types of intelligence, post-event and ex-ante. Post-event, by and large, we have made an amazing progress over the last 2 years. And in the Europol, in ECTC, we have seen in the aftermath of Paris, of the Brussels attacks, tens of thousands of leads that were exchanged very, very rapidly, and which allowed not only to elucidate, but actually to prevent things that might have happened afterwards. The problem is about that intelligence that you don't know is necessary somewhere else, because the event has not taken place yet. And there, we need intelligence services to interact more, and they are doing it. And we now have in the CTG, which the Commission has nothing to do, very important developments taking place. And we need to have cooperation between this and police. But once again, the one thing is intelligence, another is evidence. So there are good reasons why things are separated. On Birgit Zippel, very rapidly, What the 2 points we have made are exactly the points on what is going to be discussed at the Internet Forum in the coming days. On the one hand, how to address the whack-a-mole effect. You take out something and it just pops up somewhere else. The industry has volunteered to produce a system where when one entity has taken information down, all others are notified and they cannot bring it up again. But the most important thing the industry has indicated to be willing to do is to provide support, access to YouTube channels, to memes like the ones you have in here, so that significant voices of society are able to actually accede to the net space and occupy the ground that so far is basically only used by terrorists.
Thank you for that, our last word. Let's summarize what we talked about today. So looking at cross-platform use for data, safeguarding stability across Europe is something which is critical. If we don't have the democratic values in place, what is it that we're actually fighting for? The new paradigm that counterintelligence is using now, counter-terrorism is using now, is based on the rule of law and the sense that borders are no longer effective. The added value that the EU level brings to counter-terrorism measures is critical, but education in school, making sure that we have the right tone and the right message in school, but using education to counter those negative messages which are unstoppable across the internet as it is today, a different challenge for a new generation. And the awareness training that parents, schools, employers and government officials in particular need to have in terms of the application of these elements. Preventing criminal people using criminal methods as though it was applied in any other form across our lives today, and protecting our way of life. So the risk of mission creep as well was something we talked about. The extended use of data, the initial purpose of the data not being the final use, how we protect ourselves against what could be a lifetime of data which we're slowly unaware of giving to those who could in the future be our enemies. Thank you to our panel today, Josef WEIDENHOLZER from Austria, Birgit Ziepel from Germany, Dora Claudian Frunzulică from Romania, George Bento Silva from the European Commission. Thank you so much. And also to our students, Robert and Serena. I'm Brian Maguire.